And if they don't make it to MDMR because there's an AS2 failure, you would never get an IR1 that would tell you about a problem with that file. So, you know, you can make the IR1 kind of redundant if you report from CIS. You know, I asked for a USDP here 3 days ago, never got one back. That's probably describing really an AS2 failure, and then you could go troubleshoot that process, figure it out. But if you're dependent on the IR1, you might end up losing some things in the process. Everything to think about in the process. And that's pretty easy to report on by tracking things like date requested, right? I asked for USDP on this date. It's been 3 days since. Generate an exception. Things like that. Okay, so wherever in these business processes you see dotted line boxes, this one's dotted line, it's hard to tell on this screen, but usually in the presentations then there's a few slides that come after that give a little bit more detail on those boxes. This one I won't go through in too much detail, but it's just saying, it's just kind of a walkthrough of why you would ask for USDPs. So new services, clearly you're going to need new USDPs. And then the other big reason that you need USDPs is you know, you guys are going through your AMI deployment or have completed it by now, but you don't have USDPs. So when you cut over, you're going to have to get them either through a big bang or a cycle-based approach to cut over. It's important to know that when you start to acquire USDPs from MDMR, these are always permanent USDPs. There's no test USDPs really. When you're talking to the test environments, it's possible to get test USDPs, but you're not allowed to synchronize these. USDPs are copied from the production environment each night into the test environments. So you're not allowed to use the USDPs you get from the test environment because those are probably going to be taken by a production utility in the production environment. It's kind of hard to figure out now, but we'll confuse you with that later. Don't worry about it today. But for the most part, what you need to remember now is USDPs are permanent. So you don't want to kind of go into testing thinking you can screw around with these things and just ask for new ones later. Because that USDP to SDP pairing is permanent. This box is just going into that idea about reporting from CIS rather than using the IR1.
When you say permanent, let's say there's a mistake made. Can it ever be altered?
No, not with the MDMR. You can't really.
A new one created.
Yeah, you would have to come along and probably create a new SDP ID.
Yeah.
And then ask for USDP.
I'm saying the structure was created wrong for some reason in our CIS, and then the numbering. Can it be? Would we regenerate a new one for the house?
Yeah, you'd have to generate a new one in your CIS and then ask for a new one for a new one.
They screw up sometimes.
Yep. Okay, so looking at the diagram then after we talk about business process, some of the questions would be, do you have a unique identifier, your SDP ID? You said you already do. Pod in SAP, point of delivery. And then how will you acquire existing USDP IDs? Or I guess, how will you acquire USDP IDs for your existing SDPs? I don't know if you thought about that as a cutover strategy, but whether it's going to be all at once. Something to think about. And then for the most part though, this one's going to play into your new service business process. On an enduring basis, the new service business process is the one that's impacted by this new interface. Sync operator role. Not a lot here for the sync operator. There's going to be more as we get going, but if there's any manual intervention in this process, kind of what's the name that goes on that swim lane? Is it going to be sync operator for now, or somebody down the road at the utility, or some role at the utility? Seeing different strategies here, whether sync operators come from the billing department or from the metering department, but again, there's not too much to think about with this process, but there's going to be quite a bit. coming, where you'll need to think about where that function sits at the utility. Okay? Just want to have a quick break, just keep pushing forward with the next process.
Probably a good time for a break.
Yeah, a quick break. 10 minutes or so?
Yep.
Over considerations. This is maybe still a long ways away for you, but it's not a bad thing to think about near the start of the project, because I mean, even today we're seeing utilities again that are cutting over into the production environment, but still haven't figured out their web presentment strategy and that sort of thing. And once you're getting close to billing on time of use data, most people want to be able to provide this to their customers to start that education process with changing consumption patterns. So, you know, there's a few things down the road that maybe you need to start thinking about now. Your strategy. One of the reasons that we talk about cutting over with all of your USDPs is because the NDMR doesn't functionally tie the flowing of meter data to the billing in time of use format. So you can flow all your meter data into the NDMR for months and months and months. I mean, you could do it for years and never bill from the NDMR, and there's no reporting that comes out that says, you know, why haven't you billed? So, so there's no real need to tie in a project plan the cutting over of data to the NDMR with a time of use schedule. You don't have to tie the two together. So that's one big reason that we say synchronize everything at once, start to practice your sync functions, start to get used to your meter data management reports, you know, well in advance of time of use, so that when it comes time to start billing on time of use, you got all your processes figured out. And so in those few months, and even before you cut over to NDMR, what you should be trying to do is get your AMI network ready for this. Become familiar with the reports as much as possible. And become familiar with the idea of NVE and how to resolve those. So the last one there, NVE, is made easy through the ODS process. So ODS systems will take care of that stuff for you for the most part. But you want to, the first one is really the most important. If your AMI is not functioning optimally, NDMR becomes much more difficult to manage. So you want to get your SLAs as high as possible with the AMI provider before you cut over. So this is a pretty busy diagram. It's hard to read for you guys, but I'll just go through this from a high level then and talk about the different swim lanes and what the big idea is behind each of these swim lanes in your preparation. The bottom one here is customer service. I'm not sure what swim lane that should actually be for web presentment, but that's one of the things to think about. You're going to have packages to distribute to your customers as you approach time of use. And you know, so how early are you going to provide these to the customers? How far in advance of actual billing? Are you going to provide anything other than mandated educational material, like some utilities are using shadow billing type of formats to show them that, you know, even when they're in their RPP block pricing, you can provide back to them their smart meter data to say this is what you would have been billed. And so, you know, if there's a big impact for you, maybe you could think about changing your consumption patterns, that sort of thing. So if you're going to provide a lot of material, you need to put that into a project plan, make sure you're ready for it when the time comes. Web tools, you know, you may want to RFP for a web presentment product. So, you know, how far in advance do you need to do that in order to be ready? Mentioned just a few minutes ago how important it is to get the AMI system properly tuned, optimized, so that you're you know, getting 98, 99% of your data. If you get 99% or better, you know, NDMR becomes a lot easier. Requirements for 98%, so you certainly want to get there. Doesn't sound like a big difference, but if you're down at 95%, you know, it's just that small percentage increases the number of exceptions fairly significantly. Because 95% doesn't mean you're getting 95% of all intervals. It means, well, sort of does. But it can mean you're getting 0% from some meters, right, and 100% from most of your meters. And it's the meters where you're getting, you know, 20% or something of your intervals where you run into real problems with the validation of data and providing a proper time of use bill. So you want to try and get good communication from as many meters as possible. I'm not sure, how far are you guys in your deploy? Are you kind of all the way there, your roots?
Almost there, we've got a few hundred meters left.
Yeah, so you're pretty close to saturation, and that's what this decision box is. You're kind of sitting here in this decision box, saturating roots until you got all your smart meters out there, and then you start tuning the network once you've got all your smart meters there. Typically, the AMI networks become better performing networks the more smart meters that are out there. The Census has the buddy mode, Elster with the mesh. So you want to get all your meters out there before you start tuning the network if you can. And then the last couple swim lanes here, metering, billing, and ODS. The boxes are a little bit different, but really what they're talking about there is trying to figure out your business processes as much as possible, in as much detail as possible before you start to cut over, so that as you're approaching cutover, you can properly test these processes and make sure that the staff that are going to be managing them have a good understanding of them, so that when you get into the production environment there, you're not going to run into too many hiccups. So there's the development of business processes, and then we refer to unit testing in there, where you would want to walk through those processes together as a group and then come up with test scripts. And we will provide you with a good set of test scripts to start with, but you'll want to look at those and see if there's any functions we've missed and make sure you get those tested. Then we get over to this section here, which is the synchronization at cutover. A couple things to consider when you first cut over. One of the things that MDMR doesn't like is if you synchronize less than 100% of your meters, but then start to submit meter data for 100% of your meters. So they don't want AMI data files coming in, the CMEP from Census or the XML from Elster, with 100% of your meters if they haven't all been synchronized. It takes up quite a bit of processing time and horsepower at MDMR to start processing this meter data only to throw it away because you haven't synchronized it. So they only want you submitting meter data for STPs that have been properly synchronized. That can be tough to do. None of the AMI providers have any real good processes set up whereby they filter out the data according to what you've synced with MDMR. So this can be kind of a tough thing to do, and another reason why you just synchronize everything on the first day when you first cut over. That makes the AMI submission of data a little bit easier. So there's a couple of decision boxes here. Are you going to sync everything or just a part of it? It's much easier to just sync everything. If you're going to sync only parts of your population, then you need to set up some sort of a filtering process whereby you split out the meter data that you haven't synchronized, so that MDMR doesn't have to go through the processing of it. So that's been referred to as the dual sync process in here. So you're creating two sets of sync files each day, one for your entire population, one for the ones that are going to MDMR. So it would be really nice to avoid that whole piece, if you could. It'll make things easier. Because what you would end up doing is programming a bunch of functionality only for the purpose of cutover. You'd just be spending a bunch of money just to get cutover. The other decision box up here is around VE service codes. So which VE service code are you going to use to start up? This really has to do with the idea of NVE. What NVE is it's probably been a while since you've heard about how MDMR estimates data. It's been a while since you ran the education session, so I'll go through that again. When data is missing for a meter, what the MDMR does is it uses historic estimation. So whether you're on VE service code 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, it's historic estimation that's used. So for an interval that's missed, it will go back up to 30 days. It will use up to 5 light days and create a daily usage profile for that customer, which in effect comes up with an unscaled estimate for the missing intervals. Then it uses the register reads that are submitted along with that meter transfer block that have missing data to try and scale that unscaled estimate to an accurate representation of what was missed. So all of that process there uses historic data. If there's no history for an STP, like for new services, or when you first cut over to the MDMR before they have any history for that premise, then they're not going to be able to go through that estimation process. When MDMR tries to estimate missing data but can't come up with history, what you end up with is NVE. So these are intervals that need verification or edit. And so that's what this decision box comes to here, because when you cut over, you're going to end up with lots of NVE. Well, you're going to end up with NVE for any intervals that are missing. And so in your enduring process, when you start billing, NVE intervals need to be resolved before they can frame the data, before you can get billing data. So this is a kind of a hard stop in the process. If there's NVE, you got to fix it. So if you were to choose a VE service code like service code 1, you can avoid NVE at the start, but because this VE service code calls for no validation, so they won't try and estimate any missing data. This is a way that you can provide MDMR with history. You can submit meter data for a couple of weeks using VE service code 1, and it won't create NVE, so it won't create you these problems. It's something to think about. I'm not sure that it's the best thing to do, certainly if you've got an ODS already selected and in place, because the ODS is, in the long run, going to fix these NVE intervals for you anyways. So even at the time of cutover, why not use the ODS to resolve your NVE and make sure that process is working? So if you've got ODS up and running, we usually suggest just to synchronize with the VE service code that you want to use anyways. Just start with 3 if that's what you're going to use, and let ODS fix the NVE when they happen. Okay, so that's the last decision box there then, and so eventually you've ended up with your 100% of your population, your time of use population synchronized, and then you're going through a few months there where you're kind of learning and getting ready for your time of use. And that's the last box in this cutover strategy, is creating your time of use schedule. So based on OEB timelines, you've probably got a good idea of when you're going to do that now. So you probably know when you're going to cut over, when you're going to start time of use. So you've got probably a few months or more in between those two milestones where you'll be able to spend some time learning the third MDMR, and then they go, oh wait, I'm about to start billing here, I don't have a web tool set up. So it seems to be it's left to the side, I guess, in part because there's no mandate to have one really. There's no regulation, I guess.
Well, we're looking at that right now with the group, right? We're part of that.
Yeah, you should be getting a draft RFP. I thought it was going to go out Friday.
It did go up.
It did? Okay.
Yeah. Did you get that?
The business process is just kind of another consideration. It's something that, if you've seen before, I know some of you have, once it's been explained, it's kind of obvious, but if nobody took the time to explain to you, it wouldn't be obvious, and you may not catch it in time to take it into your cutover process. So we call this a midnight read process. I'm not sure what the best name for it is, but basically here what we're trying to illustrate for you is that the MDMR bills from midnight reads. When you start to bill from MDMR, you're actually billing on interval data, and interval data that's framed by MDMR happens between midnight to midnight. They only bill, or they only frame 24-hour periods of data in today's environment. Down the road, we will get to partial day framing, but in today's environment, there's only 24-hour framing. And so effectively, they're billing on midnight data. In your environment today, you're not billing on midnight data, you're billing on meter reads that come to you during the day. And so so this is something to think about a little bit, because you can run into a bit of a bump here where you either, where you have to make a decision when you're going to bill your customers for consumption twice or miss some consumption. So neither of those are very attractive. So you can accommodate this through a business process. So we'll walk through it a bit and show you the options. But what most utilities are doing is basically creating DCI files. So the same thing that you do today with your handheld file, but having that file processed by their ODS. So most of the ODS systems in the province have a process set up for this, where you can provide them with a DCI file, and they will then provide that to you to use in your billings that lead up to the MDMR transition. they will give you midnight register reads rather than register reads acquired by a meter reader through the day. And by doing that, you accommodate this need and you take care of the problem. So that's what this business process diagram is kind of generically illustrating for you. Just a request file, and you just stick the name DCI, DCO in there if you're going to use an MVRS file format. Put that through your AS2 or some other file transfer protocol to your ODS. We've got this labeled as AMCC/ODS. In the beginning, Census would sort of do this for you. They may charge you for it, but if you're only doing it for a month or two, might not be a large cost there, but and if that's the way you have to do it to accommodate this need, it's probably money well spent. But basically, you're going to provide a file to the ODS where they will go and try and find the closest midnight register read to your billing date, and put that into a response file, send it back to you, and you will move through the billing process that you're in today, register read billing.
We're actually doing that live right now with MeterSense. Like we've been doing that since July or August of last year.
For all of the utilities then, or?
Westero is just starting because they just got their ODS. Grimsby doesn't have their ODS yet, but we did it just to save initially on the meter reading, right?
Oh, right,
So
okay.
Doing AMR. There's some problems, but at least we're learning.
Make most of it, yeah.
Yeah, and we worked on a custom rule with them to do the, fill the misregister based on some intervals and stuff. So they've done some custom rule work with us
Right.
to, bring that closer to,
Great.
get more accuracy there. But that process is exactly what we're calling CP.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so but you
So
kind of highlighted
that,
that you're doing it maybe for other reasons at the moment, like to try and minimize your meter reading costs. I'll just throw out, just to complete the process a little bit, this chart here to illustrate why you need to do that in advance of MDMR. Back when I first gave this presentation to you guys, I would have been trying to draw this out on a board, and I've never did a very good job of it, so I created this chart. But basically, this is what you're in now, the environment you're in now, where you're reading meters through the day at any sort of time of day. And so to create a bill for the month of May, you're subtracting your June reading, which could have occurred at any time of day, from their May reading. If you're trying to create a time of use bill from the MVMR for the consumption month of August, if you were to use your existing process, you would be subtracting the August reading from a September reading, which could have occurred during the day. If you then went into your attempting to try and build a time of use bill for August, you would be subtracting a September reading, an August reading from your September reading. But the reading that MDMR would be using to do that will be at midnight. And if you had previously used this reading here, and we're going to maybe use this in your existing process, but then we're trying to convert to midnight, what you end up doing is you would end up duplicating this consumption or missing this period of consumption through the day, because MDMR is going to use a midnight reading. So they're going to use midnight to midnight data. So you run into this bit of a problem here if you go straight from a meter reader type of format into MDMR format. So the process that you're describing is what all utilities are doing at least once before they get to MDMR, where they would send a DCI file and grab this reading here from an ODS system or something, so that they're on midnight reads before they get to MDMR, so that you run it, so you avoid this duplication of data or loss of consumption bill to the customer. So we've got a document here called Midnight Read Request explanation that illustrates that and talks about it in more detail there if you read through it. But that's a chart kind of, isn't it? Any questions on that? Or you guys have pretty much accommodated it by the sounds of it anyways.
So,
The only thing you would need to think about there as you're approaching your cutover is, are there any meters for which you weren't able to get at midnight? But if you've already got a process to create a midnight reading, but based on the last register plus the sum of the intervals up to that midnight, I mean that's a pretty good process. So I don't think you'd have too much of a concern there. But if you had a large portion of your population that you couldn't get a midnight reading for, maybe you had a large power outage or something, you might change your bill period or something so you could get to midnights, and just try to think about that a little bit. For the most part, it sounds like you're taking care of it. So that then would conclude USDP request response education session. That's,
Doesn't have to before, right?
yeah, kind of progressively gotten shorter as time has gone on here. Eliminated some of the redundant information, but also try to concentrate more on the relevant stuff. So that's that. So we will, I guess, unless you want to jump back to the business process for USDP request response. If you want to talk in more detail, do we want to talk for a little bit about sync operator? Like, even in this process, if you try to automate it as much as possible, there is still, some level of accountability for the process. I mean, who's gonna handle exceptions to the process? Who's gonna manage the reports that come out of the process to look for the exceptions and try and detect if anything's gone wrong? So that's, I think, probably a good spot to start in making the process specific. Is who's accountable for the process.
Are we assuming we're doing this for you?
I think it's a fair assumption.
Okay.
Yeah, we
So
gotta,
it's very
I'm not sure if you're going to want to leave some of this for some SDP guys to hear as well for the business process piece of it.
Yeah, sure. We'll see how the rest of the day goes.
Yeah, because
Whether we
this
wrap
part
up
is the
a little
part
bit.
that, other than of course the billing, is the one that gets tested the most extensively, because there's a lot of things that you need to pay attention to
Yeah.
when you're syncing and when you're testing as well. You spend a lot of time verifying synchronization results and
Yeah.
making sure it's working properly.
From a business process side, what we usually talk about with synchronization are things like meter change that are heavily sync dependent on timing. If you synchronize your meter change late, you've lost meter data and things like that. So really, the business process we talk about are kind of impacted by sync. Okay, so starting off session number 2, we've talked about USDP request response then. So, and the big idea from USDP request response was you create yourself an STP, then ask for a USDP. Once you've got the USDP, you can sync. So we will talk about 2 interfaces, I guess, psync and isync. Not really different interfaces, it's the same file format, all the fields are the same. There's a file set of 7 files that is the same. Most of the processing is the same. The big difference is that the incremental sync interface is what you use to process changes, and the periodic sync interface, you send the current state of all attributes for all STPs. So a little bit different function behind the 2 files.
Is run the periodic, you don't run every day, do you?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. No, periodic audit, the name's a little bit misleading sometimes, but if you think about it as a periodically sent file that sends kind of the current state of all attributes, then it does become an audit of your isync performance, right? If you use the isync to send changes, and all your changes are very effectively communicated with NDMR, then the psync effectively audits your isync interface by sending the psync contains all the current attributes, and if your isyncs have worked properly, then the NDMR will have all the current attributes because they will have successfully processed changes. So when you think about it that way, it's not a bad name. Actually, you periodically send the file and it's auditing your isync.
Does it tell you what changed? So,
Okay, so isync, the reports do tell you what has changed, what has successfully been updated. Psync, when you read through the specs, and some of the slides in here will kind of imply that they will update changes, but in fact, when you get into production, you'll find that they will not update anything through psync. If anything is different, it creates an exception, and they have to resolve the exception. What they do when they process the psync is they're saying, for this USDB, this is the current meter. This is the current, whatever, framing structure. And if when they refer to their database, they say, well, that's not the meter I see, then it's an exception.
which means there's something wrong with your
Yes,
isync.
that's right. Yeah. Okay, so the first bunch of slides here are just on synchronization in general. They apply equally to isync and psync. I forgot to mention off the top, this little indicator, kind of a sticker type of thing down the bottom there is telling you what document the information has come from. So that one there means the detailed design document, version 2. So you'll see a couple different sources, usually the detailed design document or the TIS, the technical interface specifications. And these versions that are in these slides are a little bit old. For the most part, things haven't changed too much in the way these interfaces are processed. The big changes are still to come with the billing interface. So. Okay, so synchronization. So the LDC is responsible for the accuracy of data within its own system and for transmitting accurate data to the MDMR. So when it comes to synchronization, if you submit changes to the MDMR that aren't very accurate, but MDMR updates it, I mean, you're responsible for what you send to MDMR, and that's what this slide's trying to tell you, is that if you follow the business processes and send them bad data, MDMR is just going to update bad data. So it's, the files is what the MDMR uses to update information, so what you put in the files should be accurate. It can be very impactful to your process because if you, what the sync files are really doing is setting up, for the most part what they're doing is setting up the processing of meter read data. So if you've incorrectly synchronized which SDP a meter belongs to, that meter's consumption will be attributed to the wrong SDP. Framing structure, if you tell MDMR that it's periodic when you meant to be time of use, then your data will all be framed incorrectly and need to be reframed before you can bill from it. So synchronization is setting up some of these downstream processes that if you do that incorrectly, you can really impact your billing process. This is one slide that did have to change, probably since the last time I talked to you guys. There are now 2 ways to update a meter master data. MMD is meter master data in the MDMR. So previously this would have said 3 ways. You could, previously you could get into the graphical user interface and change synchronization data. They've locked that down, you can't do that anymore. You have to do all your synchronization through the interface files. So there are 2 ways. And really, I guess there's only one way, the incremental sync interface. You can't really even update things through psync. You have to submit the current state to the psync. So it's not really even an option to update things through psync. Okay, so the psync interface, it says here, is a complete synchronization of meter master data with your CIS. I don't love the way that is stated there, because you're not real. Synchronization kind of implies that changes are being made, but you're not changing anything through a psync interface. Psync communicates the current state of the SDP. That's all that it does. Okay, psync, the frequency of this psync process is determined between yourselves and the MDMR. Are any of the utilities larger than 15,000? I can't remember all the sizes here.
Yeah,
When you combine them, they will be.
not even that. Like, what's our,
Fort Erie's
Well, we're
15.5,
15,
but
so,
not all the,
25, isn't it, so we're billing?
like, how many smart meters in CMP?
oh, then there's more than 15.
Okay, but Westero's psync would be their own psync
Yeah.
probably, right?
CMPI
But I think
is
ours
more
about
than
25, isn't it?
20.
Yeah.
So if you're 25, then you will certainly need to communicate with MDMR before you do a psync. If you're less than about 15, I mean, we've talked to MDMR about other utilities are about 18,000, and you could probably psync whenever you want when you're in and around that 15,000 mark. 18 would probably be on the high side of it, but you could probably get away with it. But if you're 25, I mean, that's too far over, and you'd have to communicate a schedule for psync.
So we might get anything from Grimsby because they're 10-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna have
Yeah,
a-
plus a room of convention.
Yeah, so.
Oh, that's right.
So it's actually 40,000.
40.
Yeah.
Right. So,
You forget about that.
and when I say schedule, it doesn't mean that you need to tell MDMR like that for the next year, these are the dates. It just means that if you're preparing to do one, you communicate it a few weeks in advance and say, we'd like to do this one 2 Fridays from now or whatever. And if they haven't got anybody else scheduled for that day, then you'll be able to talk about a schedule with them for that particular P-Sync. Smaller utilities, you can probably do that more often. But really what you're really trying to do here is determine the effectiveness of your iSync. So you might do P-Syncs fairly frequently when you first cut over until you gain confidence in how effective your iSync is, and then slowly reduce that frequency. Because P-Sync, certainly if you have to schedule it, can be a bit of a painful process to try and figure out when you're going to land your files at NVMR so that they can process them. And, you know, if that has to be, 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning, I mean, how do you make it land there at that time, kind of thing, right? It might mean your sync operator's up at 2 in the morning on Saturday night or something, generating an iSync file, or